Session 20 of the Law of One. This is part 1, and we're going to talk about harvest of second density and human lifespan. Let's start. I've broken down session 20 into 3 parts. Just as a reminder, we're talking about from session 19 the transition of second density to third density, and we're going to continue on with that line of questioning here, of course. Things we're going to touch on are human lifespan, because they're part of third density, and some of the questions that Don asked, of course. And at the end, we're going to explain some of the stuff that happened here back then and that we still have here, some monuments or sacred places that we consider. Pretty cool stuff, but I'm not going to get ahead of myself there. In this first part, we're going to just talk about second density harvest and part of that lifespan, which is part of third density experience in the master cycle of 75,000 years, as we know. So let's start up with the first question that Don had. And it was, first question, to go back just a little bit, is what happened to the second density entities who were on this planet who were unharvestable? I assume there were some that didn't make the harvest into the third density. Can you tell me this? Ra says, the second density is able to repeat during third density a portion of its cycle. Don continues, then the second density entities that did not get harvest at the beginning of this 75,000 year period, some are still in second density on this planet. Were any of these who remain in second density harvested into third density in the past 75,000 years? The answer is this has been increasingly true. So what they're talking about here is that transition between second density and third density, the physical that happened on planet Earth, if some of the entities were able to repeat. And Ra says that, of course, as we activate third density experience on planet Earth, second density is still able to keep going with their cycle. Of course, you can see this as the activation of third density sphere for third density experience doesn't interfere with second density animals and plants in general. They continue to live here. And this has been increasingly true, that is the second density beings that were here have been going into third density, because remember, their evolution cycle goes into self-awareness, individualization of consciousness, and that's what they're trying to achieve, as we are trying to achieve for density consciousness as well. So that has been going on still in this master cycle of 75,000 years, and we're going to find out, we talked about this in the past when we talk about pets, and I got ahead of myself as usual there, but this is part of the next answer. So Don says, so more and more second density entities are making it into third density. Can you give me an example of a second density entity coming into third density, say in the recent past? Ra explains, perhaps the most common occurrence of second density graduation during third density cycle is the so-called pet, the animal which is exposed to the individualizing influences of the bond between animal and third density entity. This individuation causes a sharp rise in the potential of the second density entity, so that upon the cessation of physical complex, the mind-body complex does not return onto the undifferentiated consciousness of that species, if you will. So this is more something that we talked about in previous sessions, where pets are accelerated in their evolution from second density into third density, and this has to do with the influence that we third density beings have onto them. Again, it's a good reminder, if you have a pet, whatever that may be, a fish, a cat, a dog, a bird, whatever it is, the more you interact with this pet, then the more you give them individuated consciousness, because they create this understanding of themselves as separate from the environment, because they now interact and see the reception of different say, stimulus that they provide and get feedback from. So that's the way they create this individuation. You can see this a lot with, say, dogs are the best example because they are very dependent on us. They require a lot of care and love from us. They require, of course, their food, and their interaction with us is just at such a deep level that you can feel how much they depend on us and how much they kind of communicate with us. If you had a dog, I mean, I grew up with dogs all my life, so I can see the communication that they always had with us, and it almost becomes like normal that you know that your dog is talking to you. So this kind of consciousness is what they are creating into themselves. So when they die, they actually can incarnate in a third density vehicle like this human body. So that's the best example that exists, in the way that we create and accelerate this process. Now in nature, I assume that this is rather slow because there is not so much, let's say, catalyst for them to individuate themselves. But it does happen, and it's curious to know that it does take millions of years for this to happen in their cycle, whereas we only have 75,000 years for third density. There are reasons for that. I don't need to get into it, but it's a good point to mention that they do take a long time. So with us, basically our pets and plants as well. Plants are part of second density. Quartz or minerals as well, crystallized formations are also second density. And the more this is just speculation of mine, with quartz, because a lot of people have been asking me questions about quartz and their relationship to them. Believe it or not, well, if you are familiar with quartz and you have this bond with them, I've met a lot of people, I'm not one of them, but I've met a lot of people that have a very strong bond with quartz and crystal formations for some reason. And it sounds almost like the same that I would say I have with animals myself, and some others with plants. They talk to us. They have a talk, not in the verbal sense, but they communicate with us in some way. And this is a way of creating an individuation of consciousness for them. And well, that's just part of how it goes. But let's go on with, we still have some more to cover here in the next question. Don says, then can you give me an example of an entity in third density that was just previously a second density entity? What type of entity do they become here? Russ says, as a second density entity returns as third density for the beginning of this process of learning, the entity is equipped with the lowest, if you will so call these vibrational distortions, forms of third density consciousness. That is, equipped with self-consciousness. Okay, so let's just clarify that word that may sound a little harsh when they say that they are equipped with the lowest, if you will call this vibrational distortions, forms of third density consciousness. That is, equipped with self-consciousness. That means that when they reincarnate here for the first time as humans, they will be equipped with self-consciousness. Everything else, it really depends on where they incarnate and what kind of catalyst they receive. Something that we're going to get into in the next session is how we actually become more aware as we increase our consciousness, having this experience as humans or third density vehicles. We increase our awareness of self, and as we do that, then we can select our parents, and by that we can program our next incarnation in a better way that suits our purposes here as the experiences that we want to have. However, say a new pet like Don is asking, that incarnated for the first time, has no selection of parents, just comes in like automatically back into life as a human, and they're just simply aware, which is the most basic, and that's why they say the lowest of this consciousness, just being self-aware. If you remember, the first distortion of the creation of the universe is self-awareness. Same thing happens here in third density. They come equipped with the lowest form of consciousness. That doesn't mean that they need to live all their life in just self-awareness. Obviously, depending on what kind of life they have, and that's just the process of evolution of the soul, they will continue to raise their consciousness, as we're trying to do here. this is a pretty good point to say that as we're talking about second density going to third density, remember that our society is created and maintained and perpetuated for us to keep living between first and second density consciousness. We are in a very animalistic behavior here on planet Earth, with territorialism, separation, and division, and all that jazz. And just so you know that when we talk about raising your consciousness, it means that you bring up your awareness onto different levels of consciousness that makes you see the world from a different perspective, not from survivability or identity, or even the basic requirement of third density, of course, which is interaction with other selves. And that is our yellow ray energy center. So I think it's a pretty good point right now to make that distinction that our planet, most of the population are living between the red and orange red ray energy center, which is the lowest possible consciousness, which is actually what pets, animals, plants, quartz maybe come into an incarnation here equipped with. So just to sum it up, we're still acting as a society, as a social complex. We're still working as animals, basically, in terms of consciousness. And in behaviors or physical behaviors, I'm pretty sure that fits the pattern too. We're very animalistic here, and that's something that we need to transcend from. Of course, again, last thing before we continue on, just to mention that we do this through individuated behaviors. We don't try to do this trying to convince other people that they are animals. I don't think that goes well. But just to mention that, that's just, you know, what we need to do personally and individually. That's how it rolls. So let's go on with the next question, and we're gonna finish this and go to the next part of this video. Don says, this would be a human in our form then, who would be beginning the understanding of third density. Is this correct? Ra says this is correct. Speaking of the rapid change that occurred in the physical vehicle, the change from second to third density, this, you said, occurred in approximately a generation and a half. Body hair was lost and there were structural changes. Don continues, I am aware of the physics of Dewey Larson, who states that all is motion or vibration. Am I correct in assuming that the basic vibration, which makes up the physical world as we experience it, changes, thus creating a different set of parameters, shall I say, in this short period of time between density changes, allowing for the new type of vehicle? Am I correct? Ra says this is correct, and now I need to explain this beautiful part. Well, first of all, the previous question before this one is if they come as humans. We talked about that, that's correct. And now we get into this part. We are talking about the rapid changes that happened in the human body. We talked about that in the last session. If you haven't watched, what are you waiting for? Go watch it so it makes more sense. But if you haven't, or if you want a reminder or refresher, they're talking about the changes that happen in the primate body that we had at second density here on planet Earth. The primate body changed rapidly between a generation and a half or so. The body, the vehicle, got sort of conditioned for third density. So we basically went from primates to full human form between a generation and two. And that was a very rapid change. Now what Don is asking, if this change was due to the physics of Dewey Larson that talks about that everything is motion and vibration. And the way I understand this is that as we cross that boundary to have a third density experience, say planet Earth graduated into third density, very short time, of course, 75,000 years only, we crossed that and the rapid changes occurred. So the physics, or what happened physically here in terms of the physics of Dewey Larson, was that we entered that band, if you will, of energies, in-streaming energies that allow the vibration. Remember that everything is shaped through vibrations, and we've talked about this in the past, but just imagine that everything is vibration, and that vibration of light creates the distortions that we know as physical bodies and air and everything else. And those kind of change the programming, say, of that vibration, and it became suitable to create this new body that we have. So it's very rapid as we cross that, which is now, curiously enough, of course, we're crossing that boundary. We are already in fourth density, and that's why we're seeing this great awakening happening that is just simply an in-streaming of energies that raises your consciousness to a degree if you allow them to go through you, of course, and you have to do this work. But the point is that he's talking about the same, say, threshold that we're in right now, but between second and third density, and now from third and fourth, just as an example. And that change happened because the vibrations of the planet just updated, kind of thing. So that's what they're talking about here, and I hope that makes sense. If not, as always, leave me a comment and we'll talk about it. Next question is, just as a side question here, is the physics of Dewey Larson correct? Ross says, the physics of sound vibrational complex Dewey is a correct system as far as it is able to go. There are those things which are not included in this system. However, those coming after this particular entity using the basic concepts of vibration and the study of vibrational distortions will begin to understand that which you know as gravity, and those things you consider as n dimensions. These things are necessary to be included in a more universal, shall we say, physical theory. So, here we're talking about the physics of Dewey Larson again, and if they were correct. And Ra says that yes, they were correct, because Dewey Larson was talking about time-space, something that physics are very resilient to talk about. The idea of time-space, and we've had, of course, this is going to just shatter the mainstream narrative that we have about the creation of the universe and our interaction, all to keep denying the possibility that there exists a metaphysical aspect of this life, even though we have so many paradoxes and so many issues with our current model of physics. They will continue to suppress that. But Dewey Larson, of course, was correct in talking about time-space, and those understandings, as Ra is saying, will be able, remember, this is 1981, way before they started, getting into the depths of quantum mechanics now as we know it, and all the different findings that they had, especially in Russia, where science was not as suppressed as it was here in the US or the West, the Western world. And they discovered so many things about what David Wilcock calls the source field, which I think is a great term to talk about this field of energy that creates everything and kind of maintains and weaves the patterns of the creation as we know it. And funny enough, as Ra's saying here, and this is way before we started talking about gravity being the key point that binds both time space and space time, and they say, which as gravity, and those things you consider as n dimensions. We will begin to understand that which we know as gravity. Gravity is the binding force between these two, and it works in reverse. There's very cool research out there. I don't want to get into the little bit that I know here because it's not relevant, but it's curious to know that Ra actually validated the physics of Dewey Larson, saying that it's not complete even, that it's there are those things which are not included in this system, so there are many things that are not included there, but at least as a basic understanding, we know that this is true. So again, if you're interested in Dewey Larson, I'm going to leave a link in the description about the reciprocal system that he created and now they maintain as part of this model of physics, if you're interested, of course. It's really, really complicated. I don't think I can get into it myself, but if you're interested, go ahead. We need more people like you. Don continues and says, was this entity Dewey then, did he bring this material through in his incarnation for use primarily in fourth density? Ross says this is correct. So a pretty cool note here. I'm not sure what this means. I can only speculate a little bit if this physics was to be used in fourth density as we transition into it, because we are already in fourth density, meaning that we are still humans within the fourth density experience as we transition on it. So it could be understood, and now it makes sense. Or if, which I don't think, my speculation is more that it's for this transition and not for the fully activated 4 density, because at that point we would just simply understand naturally the physics of Dewey Larson and time space, because 4 density exists in time space itself. So my speculation, based on what I can connect with all this stuff, is that yes, this physics were created for us to understand this transition between 3rd density and 4th density, because maybe again, and I'm still on the line of speculation, they knew that we were very, very much developed into the physical science of the universe. The science that we know and that we have applicable here is pretty much physical. We have no science that talks about consciousness, aside from the secret space program and the CIA programs like remote viewing and stuff like that. Those obviously use time space as a medium for research and for developing technology in that regard. But us as plain humans and the official narrative that they give us, we're still applying it as like just plain physics of this physical plane. So Dewey Larson basically came here to give us that, possibility of exploring the metaphysical aspect of our universe. So that's my speculation on what they mean, that it's correct that going into 4th density was the reason why they brought this. So let's go on. And Don says, thank you. Yesterday, we were speaking of the split that takes place in 3rd density when an entity, either consciously or because of bias, chooses the path of service to others or service to self. The philosophical question of why such a split even exists came up. It is my impression that, as it is in electricity, if we have no polarity in electricity, we have no electricity. We have no action. Therefore, I'm assuming that in consciousness, without such polarity, there would be no action or experience. Is this correct? Ra says, this is correct. You may use the general term work. We talked about this before, and it has to do with the comparison of electricity having polarities, and the negative and the positive. And because of those two, we can create work, as Ra is saying, and correcting the more general term would be work, because without the two we cannot have work in electricity. So they're going around those lines again, and this is almost like repeated material, so I'm not going to linger too much here. And the next question is in this regard. Don says, then the concept of service to self or service to others is mandatory if we wish to have work, whether it be work in consciousness or work in the mechanical or Newtonian concept in the physical. Is this correct? Ra says, this is correct with one addendum. The coil, as you may understand this term, is wound, is potential, is ready. The thing that is missing without polarizing is the charge. So once again here, we're just seeing the example that we always have the potential. So if you want the your charge, say, to do the work, you have to polarize either the positive or the negative. But the potential is always there, dormant, if you will. And life is giving you experiences. It's almost like a river flowing through you, giving you the right experiences for you to make the choices. Choice is the key word here. So that's why they use the coil as an example, because the coil is there, the potential is there, but it's just needing the charge, the type of charge that you give it. It's going to create that work towards that polarity, if you will, whichever it may be. So let's go on. There's a little bit more onto this there. Don says, then the charge is provided by individualized consciousness. Is this correct? Ra says, the charge is provided by the individualized entity using the inpourings and instreamings of energy by the choices of free will. And here's where I wanted to get, because this is the cool part. The charge is provided by the individualized entity using the inpourings and instreamings of energy by the choices of free will. So the key thing here, as we were talking about the flow of, say, the river of energy that is coming through you or experiences itself, you as the individualized entity are using those instreamings of energy with the choice of free will. That means choice of free will. Free will is to give you choice of whether acting positively or negatively. And those two are actually polarizing you. Those will continue to bring you more experiences like that because the universe is catering to you. So whatever you are doing subconsciously into your life, the universe will keep serving you that. That's what you want. That's what you keep asking for, and that's what you keep acting upon. So those choices, whether you're conscious or not, they're creating more your reality. That's a very big part here, very important. So we have to become more conscious of our decisions and our choices, because those are the ones that are creating our reality and are also polarizing us towards the positive or the negative. Now, a key thing here that we're going to discuss further, especially when we talk about lifespan, is that we have like we spoke about before in the previous session, the sinkhole of indifference. This is the place where we don't want to take those experiences and make a choice, either positive or negative. We just stay there. We're kind of just lazy and we don't want to do anything. And we are not acting on the only thing that exists in this reality, which is choice. We're not acting on that, and we're just there, not doing anything. So this is just delaying the inevitable. It may not be in this life, maybe in another cycle, in another 75,000 year cycle that you would have to go, or anybody would have to go and repeat that so they can get their polarization as they should. So very important here. There's so much we can philosophize and talk about. This specific part, I think, is very, very important, and I wish I could just like highlight this whole thing and put it somewhere, everywhere, I would think, for anybody that I can understand, of course, what Ra is saying here with all the concepts. But let's continue on. Don says, thank you. As soon as the third density started 75,000 years ago, and we have incarnate third density entities, what was the average human lifespan at that time? Ra says, at the beginning of this particular portion of your space-time continuum, the average lifetime was approximately 900 of your years. Don asks, did the average lifespan grow longer or shorter as we progress on into third density experience? Ra says, there is a particular use for this span of life in this density, and given the harmonious development of the learned teachings of this density, the lifespan of the physical complex would remain the same throughout the cycle. However, your particular planetary sphere developed vibrations by the second major cycle, which shortened the lifespan dramatically. We talk about this in another concept where we talk about harvest and how the harvests were zero at the end of the first 25,000 years, which was 50,000 years ago. And then again, it was only like 120 something people, or less than 200, more than 100 people graduated 25,000 years ago at the end of the second major cycle. Remember, a master cycle has 3 major cycles and is 75,000 years. So we have 25,000 years each. At the end of the first 25,000 years, there was nobody. At the end of the second 25,000 years, there was only 150, let's say. And then at the end of third density experience, altogether 75,000 years total. Right now, who knows how many of us may graduate or have to repeat. So in any case, what happened was that because of the inharmonious vibrations that we had here, and we're going to get into why that is, there was a shortening of the lifespan, which was actually 900 years, and this is the appropriate time. We can get into this as we go into lifespans, but just wanted to add that in. Next question is, assuming a major cycle is 25,000 years, at the end of the first 25,000 year cycle, how long was the lifespan? Ra says the lifespan at the end of the first cycle, which you call major, has approximately 700 of your years. Don says, then in 25,000 years, we lost 200 years of lifespan. Is this correct? This is correct, Ra says. Can you tell me the reason for this shortening of lifespan? Ra says, The causes of this shortening are always an ineuphonious or inharmonious relational vibration between other selves. In the first cycle, this was not severe due to the dispersion of peoples, but there was the growing, feeling complex distortions towards separateness from other selves. This is important, very important, because third density is supposed to be an interaction between other selves. We cannot see ourselves separate from each other unless we are creating a negatively polarized planet, which means that we still need to have each other, because I need to manipulate you to accomplish what I want. So what happened basically is that we lost 200 years because there was a sense of separation between selves. This wasn't too dire, let's say, because we were separated into, call them tribes, very isolated. And as time went on, we encountered each other, and we talked about this, of course, in the past session, I believe, was that there was a lot of warlike behaviors between ourselves. We fought each other because you were from a different color or had a different culture, and this had to do, of course, from the different populations which we discussed in the past session as well, that there was different populations from other planets, from Mars, and the natives, if you want to call third density beings that graduated from second density to third density. So this mix actually created more warlike behaviors between ourselves, and we just created these inharmonious vibrations on the planet that shortened our lifespan. So that's what they're explaining here. And again, it was 200 years that we lost at the beginning of third density, the first 25,000 year cycle. Don continues with the last question we have for this video and says, I am assuming at the start of one of these cycles, there could have been either a positive polarization that would generally occur over the 25,000 years, or a negative polarization. Is the reason for the negative polarization and the shortening of the cycle the influx of entities from Mars who had already polarized somewhat negatively? Ross says this is incorrect. There was not a strong negative polarization due to this influx. The lessening of the lifespan was due primarily to the lack of the building up of positive orientation. When there is no progress, those conditions which grant progress are gradually lost. This is one of the difficulties of remaining unpolarized. The chances, shall we say, of progress become steadily less, and that creates the shortening of lifespans, because it seems like progress becomes steadily less by those remaining unpolarized. And this has been increasingly so over time, as we can see that we now only have a tenth of that, if anything. A tenth, only 10% of our natural lifespan has been accomplished now. Now you can see why in Law of One terms they talk about us as spiritual babies, because we don't have enough time in this incarnation and enough, say, catalyst to in one incarnation grow as a soul, and we need all these incarnations. I've heard things that this also happened because of genetical modifications that ETs did. I'm not too sure how that played out. I think it has to do a lot more with our orientation in general. Like they said, one thing that I'm a little dubious, and I'm not sure if I can speculate this without getting too much into my own bias, is something that they said in the last answer. They say, the lessening of the lifespan was due primarily due to the lack of the building up of positive orientation. I'm not sure what that means, because if there is a negative orientation, I would assume that the lifespan would also be the same. Or maybe you just reduce your lifespan because you're being negative, and that's just a natural thing. I'm not too sure there what happened, or how does that happen, but there's no clear answer there. So in any case, this is just part of the way of how we shorten our lifespan, and that's basically it. So something to keep in mind. We now have a very short time here on Earth. We are, however, being helped a lot by what we're talking about, the ascension process, on our energies and the in-streaming energies and our ancestors also helping us from time space, if you will, helping us out to polarize as much as we can through the catalyst that is so readily available at these times with the globalization that we have and all the global catharsis, of course, that we're going through. So these are important things. We need to take advantage of that because we only have this life, and the next one, we don't know if it's going to be here or in another planet, but certainly it's not going to be this time as we know it. This time is very, very important for us to polarize because we have so much catalyst, so many experiences, and so much to get into. So that's the end of this part one. In part two, we're going to continue on with lifespan as well. Quick information here, separate from the Law of One. I have this series running on the Great Awakening, and if you haven't watched it, it started this week, so you can watch it. And I'm covering a lot of stuff that is very current right now and how we can see this Great Awakening. I wish I could have done something more elaborate, but I'm not that good with video and editing and pictures and all this stuff. So it's just me talking about all this stuff, but it's basically a crash course, as I decided to talk about it or mention it or title it. And it talks about this Great Awakening that we're going through right now. So I'm talking about the physical reality, the control system as we know it, and the ascension. It's all here on YouTube for free, of course, so go watch it, share it for people who might resonate with this stuff, as well as the Law of One. And that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching as usual, sending you all my love, and I'll see you in part two of session 20.